Montana Territory. Late spring of 1879, the wind carried the scent of wet pine and river silt through the valley when Kolt Asher reined in his horse at the bend of the Clearwater River. He had been driving cattle east since sunup, dust still clinging to his boots and the hem of his coat, when he heard the soft splash of water not far off the trail. Not the kind of splash made by fish or deer, these were slower, human sounds. Curious, he nudged his horse closer to the water's edge, keeping quiet. There she was, a woman kneeling at the riverbank, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing a blanket clean over a flat rock. Her dark hair was half unpinned, clinging damp to her neck. Beside her, a small baby swaddled in a threadbare wrap lay on a folded coat, cheeks pink from the morning chill. The child blinked up at the sky, fussed once, then settled. Kolt stayed still, his hand resting gently on the saddle horn. She noticed him then. Her eyes jumped up sharp, startled. She stood quickly, water dripping from her skirt, protective as she reached for the baby. "I ain't looking for trouble," Kolt said, lifting one hand slow. "Just passing through." The woman hesitated, face unreadable. "Then pass through." Kolt dismounted. "Name's Kolt Asher. I got a cabin 2 miles west of here. You're on my land." Her jaw tensed. She didn't back away, just shifted the baby closer against her chest. "Didn't see a sign." "There ain't one." He took a step closer. "But I saw you and the little one. You look like you could use a roof." She didn't answer right away, just kept her arms tight around the baby and her eyes on him. Kolt waited a few moments, then said, quiet but certain, "Come home with me." The woman's name was Sylvie Fletcher. She finally told him that much once they were inside his cabin, and the baby Daisy, barely 4 months old, was asleep in a wooden crate with a folded quilt in it. She had not planned to tell him anything. But the fire was warm, and the bread he offered her was soft and still steaming. She watched him move around the kitchen like he had done it 1,000 times, and maybe he had. There was something steady about him. "I left Missouri in the fall," she said eventually, voice low. "My husband died just before winter, shot in a card game in Jefferson City. I had no family left back there, and Daisy was barely born, so I packed what I could carry and kept west." Kolt nodded slowly, leaning back in his chair. "You walked, rode a wagon for a while, worked odd jobs in Helena. Then someone stole my things. I have been walking since." He didn't ask who stole her things. He didn't ask what job she worked. He just said, "You made it farther than most would." She looked across the table at him. "I did not plan on stopping here. I did not plan on finding a woman washing clothes in my river either," he said. "But I'm not sorry it happened." She blinked, breath catching just a little. Kolt stood then, slow and sure. "You and Daisy stay here as long as you want, no strings. Just a roof, food, and peace." Sylvie did not answer right away. Instead, she pressed a hand to Daisy's chest, then looked up at him. "Why?" "Because I got more than I need and you have less than you deserve." It was not a grand gesture, not a declaration, just a truth offered plain. 3 days passed. Sylvie stayed. She helped around the cabin. Washed linens, cooked stew, fed Daisy in the rocker by the fire while Kolt worked the land. He was quiet but not cold. He watched her sometimes, not like a man who wanted something from her, but like someone who had not realized how empty a place had been until it filled up. On the 4th evening, Sylvie stood at the doorway, arms folded, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Kolt came to stand beside her. "I used to dream about land like this," she said. "Quiet, safe, mine." "It can still be," he said. She looked at him. "I am not the same woman I was when I left Missouri." "Good," he said. "Neither am I the same man I was 10 years ago. Life changes us." "That is not a bad thing." She studied his face. "What changed you?" He looked out at the hills. "My brother died in the war. I came back to nothing. Built this place with my hands, every board, every stone. Thought I'd just live quiet, alone." Sylvie didn't speak. He turned to her. "Then I saw you at the river." She felt her throat tighten. "You can have this place," he said. "You and Daisy, I mean it." Sylvie lifted her chin. "And what about you?" Kolt stepped closer, just enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I would stay. If you wanted me to." She did not speak, but her hand found his. Fingers laced, slow and careful, like she was testing the truth of what she felt, he held on. That night, she did not sleep in the corner by the hearth. She slept in the bed, Daisy between them and Colt's hand resting lightly over theirs. Not a word spoken. But something had shifted, something real. And it was just beginning. By the end of the second week, the rhythm between them had settled into something unspoken but sure. Morning light slanted through the east window when Colt came in from the barn with his sleeves rolled and a sheen of sweat across his brow. Sylvie was at the stove, turning biscuits in the skillet with practiced hands, her hair pinned up to keep the heat off her neck. "Fence near the south line's sagging," Colt said, setting a coil of wire on the table. "I'll ride out after breakfast, might take most the day." She didn't turn from the stove. "Want me to send lunch with you, if you don't mind?" Daisy stirred in her cradle by the hearth, lips puckering in her sleep, then settled again. Colt poured water into the basin by the door, washing the trail dust from his hands. "That colt I've been breaking took to the bit better this morning." Sylvie nodded, still focused on the biscuits. "You always talk to your horses like people," he glanced at her, a trace of surprise in his eyes. "They listen better than most." She gave a soft sound, not quite a laugh. "I used to talk to our milk cow, thought she understood me better than my husband ever did." Colt dried his hands. "You miss him." She pulled the biscuits from the pan, set them on a plate, and then finally looked at him. "I miss the idea of him, the real man, no." He was hard in ways that never softened. Colt didn't answer right away. He took the plate, split one biscuit open, and passed half to her. She sat across from him. "You ever think about marrying again?" He chewed slowly, watching her. "I think about what it'd mean." And he set the biscuit down. "It'd mean putting someone before myself, making her life easier, not harder. If I can't do that, I wouldn't ask her." Sylvie's gaze held steady. "You've already made mine easier." "That don't mean I've earned anything." She didn't argue. Instead, she laid her hand flat on the table between them. He didn't take it, not yet, but he looked at it like it meant more than words. That afternoon, while Colt rode out to mend the fence, Sylvie brought a bucket of water to the side of the house and scrubbed the front stoop clean. Daisy dozed in her sling, tucked against her chest. The sky had turned overcast, the kind of gray that pressed low without bringing rain. She paused, hand on her hip, and looked out toward the slope where Colt had disappeared. Inside, she found a box tucked behind the dry goods shelf. Inside were folded letters, a rusted Union belt buckle, and a photograph of two boys, one with Colt's jawline, the other younger, both dressed in Sunday shirts and staring solemn at the camera. When Colt returned near dusk, his shoulders sunburned, he found Sylvie kneading dough at the kitchen counter, sleeves dusted in flour. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, setting his hat on the hook. "I found the photograph," she said. "The one with your brother." He didn't move for a moment. "He was 17 when he died. We were meant to come out here together, homestead, build something decent." Sylvie wiped her hands clean. "You've done it." Colt looked at the floor. "Sometimes I still hear him, not in words, just the things he'd say if he saw all this." She stepped closer. "What would he say about me?" Colt met her eyes. "He'd tell me not to waste time wondering if you'd stay." Sylvie reached up, touched the side of his face with fingers still warm from the dough. "Then maybe you ought to stop wondering." He leaned into her touch. "You sure?" "I wouldn't still be here if I wasn't." Daisy let out a small, whimpering cry from the cradle, and Sylvie broke the moment to lift her. Colt watched her settle the baby against her shoulder, humming something low and steady. He crossed the room slow. "You ever think about naming her after someone?" Sylvie tilted her head. "She's Daisy, that's hers alone," he nodded. "I like that." She looked up at him, eyes soft, tired in a way that came from years, not days. "I want her to grow up somewhere steady, where the air's clean and the people speak plain." "You already found that," Colt said. "You just haven't called it yours yet. I'm getting close." Her voice was quiet, close enough to see it. He didn't touch her then, didn't press anything more, just stood beside her with the dusk leaning in through the windows and the warmth of the hearth curling around their feet, no promises. No rush, just the first roots of something taking hold. The first true summer rain came 3 weeks later, sweeping down from the bitterroots in a wide gray curtain, soaking the valley before noon. Kolt came in from the pasture soaked to the knees, carrying his saddle over one shoulder and a wire cutter in his other hand. Sylvie was by the hearth, coaxing a weak flame to life with a twist of dry moss and pine bark. "Storm's running fast," he said, setting the saddle near the door. "River's already high." Sylvie didn't glance up. "I brought in the wash. Daisy's things were near dry by the time it started." He bent to unlace his boots, water dripping onto the floorboards. "You think about what I said yesterday?" She sat back on her heels, the smell of wet wool and cedar filling the room. "About the garden?" Kolt nodded. "That patch behind the barn's got good soil, needs clearing." "I've never worked one on my own," she said. "My mother kept a small one, but I was always better at baking than planting." "You're steady," he said. "That's all it takes." She brushed a damp curl from her cheek. "What would we grow?" "Whatever you like. Cabbage keeps well, beans are easy." "Maybe squash if the frost holds off." Sylvie stood, wiping her hands on her skirt. "I'll start tomorrow if the ground's soft from the rain." He watched her walk to the cradle where Daisy stirred. "You don't have to do everything at once." She lifted the baby, rocking her gently. "I'm not trying to do everything, I'm trying to belong." Kolt crossed the room and picked up a folded cloth from the windowsill. "You already do." She looked at him, then down at Daisy. "She's growing so fast, sometimes I forget how small she still is." He handed her the cloth. "You miss your mother?" Sylvie nodded, eyes distant. "She died when I was 17. Fever took her before the doctor ever made it up the ridge." Kolt rested a hand on the mantel. "That's young to lose someone. She taught me to sew, to keep a house warm with little. But she never talked about love, just duty. I used to think they were the same." He shifted his weight. "You still think that?" "Not anymore," she said quietly. "Some things feel different here, like they could last." The fire caught then, sending up a thin crackle of flame. They both watched it a moment, the soft hush of rain against the roof filling the silence. "Did you ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. "Once," he said. "Before the barn was built, before the well was dug, I thought about Texas, maybe Utah territory. But it never felt right. And now," he met her eyes, "now I don't think about leaving at all." Sylvie stepped closer, Daisy quiet in her arms. "I used to think I'd always be passing through, never staying long enough to matter." "You matter here," Kolt said. "More than you know." She didn't answer him with words. Instead, she shifted Daisy to one side and reached out with her free hand, resting it lightly on his chest. He covered it with his own, and for a long moment neither of them moved. The logs in the fire popped, the only sound in the cabin aside from the rain. Sylvie's voice when it came was low. "If I planted roots here, I'd want them to be deep. I'd want them to hold." "They would," Kolt said. "Because they'd be ours." She nodded once, then leaned in, her forehead brushing his shoulder. He held her there, careful not to press too close with Daisy between them. "I don't want to rush anything," she whispered. "You're not," he said. "You're just growing something real." That night, when the storm passed and the wind quieted, Sylvie stood at the open door, watching mist drift across the field. Kolt brought her a shawl and placed it around her shoulders without a word. Behind them, the baby slept. Ahead of them, the earth waited, soft and ready. By late July, the soil behind the barn had begun to yield. Green beans climbed their stakes in tidy rows, and squash blossoms opened wide beneath broad leaves. Sylvie worked the garden in the cooler hours of the morning, Daisy tied snug against her back with a strip of cotton she'd sewn from one of Kolt's old shirts. The baby liked the rhythm of her motion, the soft brush of leaves and the murmur of Sylvie's voice as she named each plant out loud. Kolt had added a lean-to beside the woodshed that week, meant for splitting kindling in the shade. He worked shirtless in the heat, his back tanned and strong as he drove the axe into seasoned rounds. Sylvie noticed the simple care he took in every task, tools cleaned and hung proper, boots brushed before they came inside, the way he always checked the latch on the door twice before bed. That evening, while Daisy napped with her thumb in her mouth and her curls damp from the heat, Sylvie stitched a muslin gown by the window. Kolt sat nearby, sharpening his drawknife, the rasp of metal on stone steady as a heartbeat. "You ever think about what kind of man you'd have been if the war hadn't happened?" she asked, not lifting her eyes from the hem. He paused, blade in hand. "I used to. Lot of nights I'd lie awake, wondering who I'd be if I'd stayed in Tennessee and never picked up a rifle." "What did you come from?" she asked. "Father was a cooper, made barrels for whiskey and nails. Wanted me to learn it, but I hated the noise, I liked the woods better." She nodded a thread. "Did he live to see you come west?" "No, fever took him the winter after Appomattox." Sylvie looked up then. "You carry a lot quiet, Kolt." "So do you," he said, "but you wear it different, you keep moving forward." "I have to," she said. "Daisy doesn't get to wait for my grief to settle," he nodded once. "You ever want more children?" Her hands stilled. "I don't know," she said. "I've never had the chance to wonder what I wanted, but I think, yes, if the days were good, if it felt like it does now." He set the drawknife down. "I'd raise them with you." Sylvie folded the muslin carefully and set it aside. "You already are." The next morning, Kolt rode down to the trading post to pick up nails and lamp oil. Sylvie stayed behind, wiping down the shelves and humming to Daisy, who had learned to sit on her own and slap her hands against the floorboards in delight. That afternoon, a wagon rolled up the trail, a man and woman, older, their clothes travel worn and plain. Kolt rode in behind them, dismounting with a quiet look that told Sylvie he hadn't expected them either. "This is Roland and Mabel James," he said, taking Daisy from her arms to let her breathe easier. "They built a place south of here years back, sold it off last spring. Heading to Butt now." Roland tipped his hat. "We heard there might be someone needin' a spare cradle. Ours is sittin' idle." Sylvie blinked. "You rode up here just for that," Mabel smiled. "We heard about a woman with a baby on Kolt's land." That was enough. Sylvie led them inside, and Mabel laid a hand on her shoulder as she passed. "You've done right by yourself." "I can see it." Later, after the wagon had rattled off and Daisy was nestled in the new cradle oak, polished, smooth as river stone, Sylvie leaned into Kolt as he stood watching the horizon. "You didn't tell me people here looked out for each other." "I didn't know they still did," he said. "Not like that," she turned to him. "If we married, I wouldn't need much." He didn't flinch at the word. "You'd have everything I could give. I don't want anything bought, just your name and that you stay." "I was always gonna stay," he said. That night, under a sky thick with stars, Sylvie took his hand in the dark and held it across her waist, her back against his chest. Daisy slept in the new cradle near the foot of the bed, and the house was still. "You sure?" Kolt whispered. "Yes," she said. And with that, the last piece of her old life let go, and the future took its place. The wedding took place beneath the cottonwoods behind the cabin, where the earth sloped gently toward the river and wild roses bloomed in scattered patches along the bank. Mid-August warmth clung to the air, sweetened by pine and the slow drift of river water. Sylvie wore a dress she'd sewn herself from a fine calico Kolt had traded for in Missoula. It was pale blue, with a high collar and sleeves that buttoned at the wrist. Daisy, now crawling and full of laughter, sat in a hand-woven basket lined with a wool blanket, chewing on her fingers and watching the movement around her with wide, curious eyes. Mabel James stood beside Sylvie, pinning a ribbon at her collar, steady hands and a quiet smile. "You look like you belong here," she said, adjusting the bow with care. "Like the land's been waiting for you." Sylvie turned her head slightly toward Kolt, who stood a few paces off, speaking low with Roland. He wore his best shirt, the sleeves freshly mended, and had slicked back his hair with river water. He looked toward her as if he'd felt her gaze, and in that brief glance, something passed between them, wordless and certain. The preacher, a circuit rider passing through on his way to Fort Owen, began the ceremony with a prayer so soft it nearly lost itself in the breeze. They exchanged vows without embellishment, hands bound with a strip of linen dyed with elderberry. Kolt's voice was low but sure when he spoke. Sylvie's words trembled only once when she said his name, and then steadied. Daisy let out a small squeal just as they were declared man and wife, and the sound drew quiet laughter from the few neighbors who had come, those who lived scattered across the valley and had ridden in despite the dust and heat. Afterward, they ate cornbread and roasted trout beneath the shade. Mabel passed around jars of blackberry cordial, and someone brought out a fiddle. Kolt kept Daisy balanced on his knee while Sylvie sat beside him, her cheek resting against his shoulder as the sun dipped behind the ridge. There was no toast, no fine speech, only the ease of full bellies, shared stories, and the hush of dusk settling in. That night, Kolt carried Daisy into the bedroom first, laying her gently in her cradle. Sylvie stood at the door, her hands folded around a sprig of wild lavender someone had tucked into her hair. "She'll wake before dawn," she murmured. "I'll take her," Kolt said, drawing the quilt up under the baby's chin. "You sleep." She stepped inside, reaching for his hand. "We're not just surviving anymore." He turned toward her, their fingers laced. "No, we're building." They undressed with quiet care, folding their clothes and setting them aside. Kolt ran his fingers along the line of stitches in her bodice, undoing them one by one. Sylvie's breath caught, not from shyness, but from the depth of what it meant to be wanted gently without rush or demand. When he touched her, it was with reverence, not hunger. She traced the scar above his collarbone, the one she hadn't asked about before, and he told her in a whisper that it came from a splintered beam during a storm outside Helena. She kissed it. They came together slowly, the summer night warm around them, the sound of the river a steady hush through the open window. Nothing hurried. Nothing held back. When they fell asleep at last, it was with arms around each other and the baby's soft breathing close by. The first frost came early that year, dusting the edges of the garden with silver. The beans had long since been picked, dried, and stored in sacks under the bed. Kolt spent his days splitting wood, trapping for pelts, and making repairs to the cabin's roof before the snow. Sylvie began sewing quilts for the winter, her stitches tight and even. One afternoon, she and Kolt stood beside the barn, watching Daisy take her first steps on unsteady legs across the soft earth. She wobbled, then sat down hard, grinning wide at her own triumph. "She's stubborn," Sylvie said, laughing. "She gets it honest," Kolt replied. That winter they read aloud in the evenings by lamplight, Sylvie's voice strong, Kolt's slower, more deliberate. He'd never been taught to read well, but he learned beside her, tracing letters with his finger until the words stayed in his mind. Sometimes, after Daisy was asleep, they danced slow to songs they couldn't remember all the words to, Kolt's hand on her back, her cheek against his chest. The cabin, once quiet and still, now pulsed with life. Spring returned with green shoots pushing up through thawed soil. Kolt built a second cradle, rough-hewn but sturdy, because Sylvie's belly had begun to swell. She told him in the garden, dirt on her cheeks, her hands shaking just a little. He'd knelt to press his ear to her stomach, listening for something he couldn't yet hear. When the baby came, it was a girl born just before dawn, with Sylvie gripping Kolt's hands so hard his knuckles turned white. Mabel helped deliver her, and afterward, Kolt held both Sylvie and the child, his eyes glassy, his voice rough as he whispered her name, Clara. Years passed. The garden grew wider. Kolt added a second room to the cabin, then a porch. Daisy learned to ride, her curls tied back with blue ribbon, Clara trailing behind her with bare feet and a wild laugh that belonged to no one but herself. Sylvie taught them to sew, to gather herbs, to read aloud from Kolt's dog-eared books. Kolt taught them to mend fences, to track mule deer, to split kindling straight. One autumn, while the girls were helping bring in the last of the squash, Sylvie stood at the edge of the field, her hands folded over her apron, watching Kolt repair a gate hinge. He looked up, caught her gaze, and smiled, not the kind that needed words, just a quiet reaching across the space between them. She walked to him, brushed sawdust from his sleeve. "Still glad I stayed?" she asked. He set the hammer down, drew her close. "Every single day." They stood there as the wind rustled the cottonwoods and the sun warmed the tops of the hills, the valley holding the hush of a life well earned. Together, they had built it board by board, season by season. Not loud or grand, but steady and deep, like roots that held through every storm. And it lasted.